Her husband slapped her, her mother-in-law laughed, but her powerful CEO father stormed in with 2 security guards. Don't miss. Chapter 10. The shocking twist will leave you speechless. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Lord cover you with his endless grace, healing your pain, answering your prayers, and filling your homes with peace and love. Amen. If you are here, write present. If you feel this bond, write, I am with Mr. Peter. My family, these stories are my heart, my prayers, my sacrifice for you. When you leave before the end, it breaks me. It feels like my hard work and love are unseen. Please stay till the last word. Every moment is made with love for you. And to my new family, if you doubt me, ask my old family. They know my truth and loyalty. Their faith is the proof of who I am. Your support is my greatest blessing. Together, we are one unbreakable family under God's love. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Every click keeps this family alive. The greatest love stories begin with the most dangerous lies. Barra Blackwood pressed her back against the cold marble wall of the Ritz-Carlton service corridor, her heart pounding as footsteps echoed down the hallway. Not security this time, just another waiter rushing past with champagne flutes that caught the dim light like liquid diamonds. She exhaled slowly, smoothing down her simple black uniform that cost less than the appetizers being served 30 feet away in the ballroom where her father's charity gala was in full swing. For 23 years, she had lived in the shadows of her own life. Alexander Blackwood's daughter, heir to a business empire worth $12 billion, was supposed to be studying at Oxford, according to tonight's program. The truth was far more complicated. 3 assassination attempts before her 18th birthday had taught both father and daughter that money was a magnet for monsters. So, while the world believed Barra Blackwood was a pampered princess studying abroad, the real Barra worked minimum-wage jobs under the name Barra Jones, learning what it meant to be human. Tonight, she was just another invisible servant in her father's glittering world. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was literally serving the people who would kill to have what she'd been born with. Every face in that ballroom represented millions or billions, but none of them understood what it truly cost to be worth that much. The weight of bodyguards watching your every move, the isolation of never knowing if someone loved you or your portfolio, the suffocating fear that had shaped every day of her existence since her mother's death. "Excuse me, miss?" The voice made her spin around, and her breath caught in her throat. A man stood at the end of the corridor, tall, with sandy brown hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it, wearing a tuxedo that was expensive, but not quite expensive enough for this crowd. His green eyes held a kindness that seemed genuine in a room full of calculated smiles. Something about him was different. The way he stood, slightly uncertain but not apologetic. The way his smile reached his eyes without calculating what he might gain from her response. In a world where every interaction was a transaction, he looked real. "I think I'm lost," he continued, flashing a sheepish grin that made her stomach flutter. "I was looking for the restroom, but I seem to have wandered into, well, wherever this is." "Staff area," Barra managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're not supposed to be back here." "Story of my life," he laughed, and the sound was warm honey over broken glass. "Harry Fraser. And you are?" She should have said nothing, should have pointed him back toward the ballroom and disappeared into the maze of service corridors. Instead, she found herself saying, Barra Jones. The false name rolled off her tongue so easily now, after years of practice. But saying it to Harry felt different, not like hiding, but like putting on a costume for a play she actually wanted to perform in. "Well, Barra Jones, you have the most beautiful eyes I've ever seen." Heat flooded her cheeks. In her world, her real world, men said things like that because of her father's money. They'd done their research, knew exactly what compliments might open doors to the Blackwood fortune. But Harry Fraser didn't know who she really was. He saw only a girl in a server's uniform with chocolate dark skin and natural hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. He saw her, not her bank account. "You shouldn't say things like that," she whispered, even as something inside her bloomed at the honesty in his voice. "Why not if it's true?" Before she could answer, voices echoed from the main corridor, her father's security team doing their rounds. Panic flashed through her, sharp and familiar. If they found her talking to a guest, if they recognized her despite the uniform and carefully applied makeup designed to make her look ordinary. Without thinking, she grabbed Harry's hand. "This way! Quick!" His hand was warm, slightly calloused from real work, so different from the soft, manicured hands of the men in her father's circle. She pulled him deeper into the service area, past industrial kitchens where chefs worked in choreographed chaos, past storage rooms filled with enough crystal to stock a small country, until they reached a small alcove near the loading dock. Only then did she realize she was still holding his hand. "Thank you," he said softly, but he didn't let go either. "Though I have to ask, are you hiding from someone, or am I?" "Both," she admitted, then wondered why she was being honest with a complete stranger. Harry studied her face in the dim light, and Barra felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her disguise. He was looking at her like she was a puzzle he wanted to solve, not a prize he wanted to win. "You don't belong here either." "What makes you say that?" "The way you move, like you know every inch of this place but wish you didn't. And your voice, you're educated. More educated than most of the people in that ballroom, I'd guess. Private schools, probably. The kind that cost more than most people make in a year." Barra's pulse quickened. He was too perceptive, too dangerous. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're beautiful. I know you're mysterious. And I know that meeting you tonight feels like the most important thing that's ever happened to me." The words hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Barra had been trained from childhood to spot lies, manipulation, people who wanted to use her. But Harry's eyes held nothing but honest vulnerability, the kind of naked emotion that couldn't be faked. "I should go," she whispered, even as every instinct screamed at her to stay. "Don't." His hand tightened around hers. "Please, I know this is crazy, but have coffee with me tomorrow? Somewhere normal, somewhere real." "You don't understand? Then help me understand. One coffee. That's all I'm asking." Later, Barra would wonder if her life might have been different if she'd said no, if she'd walked away from those green eyes and that honest smile, if she'd chosen safety over the dangerous thrill racing through her veins. But 23 years of living in hiding had made her hungry for something real, something true. "Okay," she breathed. "Tomorrow." The smile that lit up Harry's face was brighter than all the diamonds in the ballroom combined. They exchanged numbers, hers under the name Barra Jones, and made plans to meet at a small cafe in Brooklyn, far from Manhattan's glittering towers where her father ruled his empire. As they crept back toward the main corridor, Harry stopped suddenly. "Barra." "Yes?" "Whatever you're running from, whatever you're hiding from, you don't have to be afraid with me, I promise." If only he knew that she wasn't running from danger. She was danger. The kind of danger that came with bodyguards and bulletproof cars and enemies who would kill for the chance to hurt Alexander Blackwood through his beloved daughter. The kind of danger that made loving her a death sentence. But looking into Harry's eyes, she let herself believe, just for one moment, that love might be stronger than fear. 3 hours later, as the gala wound down and the last guests departed in their chauffeur-driven cars, Barra slipped out through the service entrance. Her father's head of security, James, was waiting by a nondescript sedan, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes alert to every shadow, every potential threat. "Miss Blackwood," he said quietly, "your father would like to see you." The ride to the family penthouse was silent, but Barra could feel James watching her in the rearview mirror. He'd been her primary bodyguard since she was 12, had saved her life twice, and knew her well enough to recognize when something had changed. Alexander Blackwood was waiting in his study, still wearing his tuxedo but with his bow tie undone, looking every inch the man who could buy and sell small countries before breakfast. The room was his sanctuary, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, walls lined with first-edition books and priceless art, a massive desk that had belonged to a railroad baron. "How was your evening?" he asked without looking up from his papers. "Fine," Barra replied, her pulse still racing from her encounter with Harry. "Any interesting conversations?" Barra's blood turned to ice. Of course her father knew. Alexander Blackwood hadn't built an empire by missing details. His security cameras were everywhere. His people saw everything. She'd been naive to think she could have even 5 minutes of normalcy without it being catalogued and analyzed. "Papa?" "Harry Fraser," Alexander said, finally looking up. 28 years old, works as a marketing coordinator for Henderson and Associates, makes $43,000 a year, lives in a studio apartment in Queens, clean background check, no criminal record, but what? Alexander's expression darkened. His family, Barra, his mother, Susan Fraser, has a history of manipulation and financial exploitation. She's currently living in Australia to escape gambling debts. His father died when Harry was young, leaving debts that Susan made Harry pay off. This is not a family you want to entangle yourself with. You had him investigated already? The moment my security team flagged an unauthorized interaction with my daughter, yes. Alexander stood, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the city he helped shape. "Barra, you know the dangers. You know why we've built these walls around your life. Getting involved with someone—" "I'm already involved," Barra said quietly. The words fell between them like stones into still water. Alexander turned slowly, his expression shifting from concern to something approaching fear. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm 23 years old, and I've never had a real conversation with a man who didn't know who my father was. I've never been looked at like I mattered for myself, not my bank account. And tonight, for the first time in my life, I felt normal. Normal gets you killed, Barra. Living like this is already killing me, Papa. Every day, a little more." Father and daughter stared at each other across the gulf of love and fear that had defined their relationship since Barra's mother died in a car bombing when Barra was 5. Alexander had built walls around his daughter's life to protect her, but those walls had become a prison. "Promise me you'll be careful," Alexander said finally. "I promise." But they both knew that some promises were made to be broken, especially when the heart wanted what the heart wanted. And Barra's heart, for the first time in her life, wanted Harry Fraser more than it wanted safety. As she prepared for bed that night in her childhood room, decorated in shades of pink that she'd outgrown years ago but hadn't had the heart to change, Barra caught sight of herself in the mirror. For the first time in years, her eyes held something other than resignation. They held hope. Tomorrow, she would meet Harry Fraser for coffee. Tomorrow, she would take the first step toward a normal life, even if it destroyed everything she'd been taught to believe about love and safety and the price of both. Tomorrow, her real life would begin. Chapter 2. Paradise Built on Lies. 6 months later, Barra Fraser stood in her tiny Queens apartment kitchen, wearing Harry's oversized Columbia University t-shirt and nothing else, making coffee for the man who had no idea he'd married a billionaire. The morning sun streamed through their small windows, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floors they'd refinished together during their 2nd month of marriage. Barra had insisted on doing the work themselves, claiming it would save money. The truth was, She'd never used her hands for anything more demanding than signing trust fund documents, and every blister, every aching muscle, every small victory of honest labor felt like freedom. "Good morning, Mrs. Fraser." Harry's voice was thick with sleep and satisfaction as his arms wrapped around her waist from behind. "Good morning, Mr. Fraser," she replied, melting back against his chest. Even after 6 months of marriage, the name still sent shivers through her. Bara Fraser. Not Blackwood, not the heir to an empire, just a woman loved by a good man. Harry's lips found the sensitive spot where her neck met her shoulder, and she nearly dropped the coffee pot. "You know what today is? Tuesday?" 6 months, he murmured against her skin. 6 months since you said yes to the crazy guy who proposed after dating you for 2 weeks. 3 weeks, Bara corrected, turning in his arms. And you weren't crazy. You were perfect. The proposal had been beautifully, impossibly Harry. No ring, he'd been saving for one but couldn't wait. No fancy restaurant or public declaration. Just the two of them on the roof of his building at sunset, Harry's voice shaking as he told her that he'd rather spend one lifetime with her than eternity without her. Bara had said yes before he finished asking. Her father had nearly had a stroke when she announced her engagement to a man she'd known for less than a month. The wedding had been a small affair. Just them, a justice of the peace, and 2 witnesses Harry found on the street. Alexander Blackwood hadn't attended, though Bara suspected his security team had been watching from a distance. "I have something for you," Harry said, reaching for a small wrapped box on the counter. "Harry, you can't afford—" "Hey," his finger pressed gently against her lips. "Let me spoil my wife occasionally, okay? Besides, this didn't cost much." Inside the box was a simple silver chain with a small pendant shaped like a coffee cup. It was probably $10 from a street vendor, but when Harry fastened it around her neck, Bara felt like she was wearing the crown jewels. "Because that's where it all started," he said softly. "Our first coffee date." Tears pricked at Bara's eyes. She owned necklaces worth more than most people's houses, but nothing had ever meant more than this silly little coffee cup charm. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible." Their kiss tasted like coffee and promises, deep and slow and full of the heat that had never faded between them. Harry lifted her onto the counter, his hands sliding under the t-shirt she wore, and Bara forgot about everything except the way he made her feel. Treasured, desired, completely and utterly his. "We're going to be late for work," she gasped as his mouth moved down her throat. "Worth it," he replied, and proved it with his hands and mouth until Bara agreed wholeheartedly. Later, as they hurried to catch the subway, Bara to her job at a non-profit organization, Harry to his marketing firm, Bara marveled at how perfectly ordinary their life had become. They fought about whose turn it was to do dishes. They stayed up too late watching terrible movies. They made love on every surface of their tiny apartment and fell asleep tangled together like teenagers. It was everything Bara had dreamed of and never thought she could have. The non-profit where she worked, under the name Bara Jones Fraser, focused on providing educational opportunities for underprivileged children. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was giving away her father's money to help kids while pretending to be someone who needed the modest salary the job provided. But she was good at the work, passionate about it, and her colleagues respected her ideas without knowing she could fund every program they dreamed of with pocket change. "Bara, can I see you for a moment?" Her supervisor, Janet, called her into the office that afternoon. "Of course." "I just got off the phone with an anonymous donor," Janet said, her eyes bright with excitement. "Someone wants to fund our entire after-school program for the next 5 years. We're talking about nearly $2 million. Bara managed to look surprised. "That's incredible. Do we know who it is?" No, but they specifically requested that the donation be managed by you. They were impressed by your work on the scholarship proposal. Bara nodded, her heart warming. Her father might not approve of her marriage, but he was still supporting her work in his own way. It was his language of love, making sure she could do what mattered to her, even if he couldn't understand her choices. That evening, Bara and Harry celebrated the non-profit's good fortune with take-out Chinese food and cheap wine on their fire escape, watching the sun set over Queens. Harry had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, and Bara thought he looked more handsome than any man in $1,000 suit. "Tell me about your family again," Harry said suddenly. Bara's chopsticks paused halfway to her mouth. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. You never talk about them, and I want to know where you came from. What made you who you are?" The lies came easily now, polished smooth by months of repetition. Parents killed in a car accident when she was 18. No siblings. A small inheritance from a deceased aunt that allowed her to live modestly but comfortably. The story was simple, clean, untraceable. "It's hard to talk about," she said, which was absolutely true. "I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to push." "No, it's okay. You should know." Bara took a breath, hating herself for every word. "They were good people. They would have loved you." Harry's hand found hers. "I wish I could have met them." "Me too." That night, as Harry slept beside her, Bara stared at the ceiling and thought about the weight of secrets. Every day her lie grew heavier. Every time Harry worried about money, every time he picked up extra work to pay for some small luxury for their apartment, every time he apologized for not being able to give her more, the guilt ate at her a little deeper. But how could she tell him the truth now? How could she explain that she'd lied about everything from the very beginning, that the woman he'd fallen in love with didn't exist? Her phone buzzed softly, a text from her father. "Dinner tomorrow? I have something important to discuss." Bara closed her eyes. In the morning, she would tell Harry she had to work late. She would take the subway into Manhattan, change clothes in a department store bathroom, and become Bara Blackwood for 2 hours. Then she would come home to Queens, to Harry, to their tiny apartment and their beautiful, impossible life built on beautiful, impossible lies. But for now, she was just Bara Fraser, lying in bed next to the man who loved her without conditions or complications. Harry stirred in his sleep, his arm tightening around her waist, and Bara pressed her face against his shoulder. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you more than truth, more than safety, more than anything." The words hung in the air like a prayer and a confession, and Bara fell asleep, hoping that love would be enough when the truth finally came to light. Because sooner or later it always did. But not today. Today she was just a woman in love with her husband, and that was enough to build a universe on. Chapter 3. The Arrival. The doorbell rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and with it, paradise began its slow, inevitable descent into hell. Bara was folding laundry on their bed, Harry's work shirts mixed with her simple dresses, everything smelling like the lavender detergent she'd learned to love because it was what normal people used. Their tiny apartment felt especially cozy that afternoon, with October sunlight streaming through the windows and jazz music playing softly from Harry's old radio. "Babe, can you get that?" Harry called from the bathroom where he was fixing a leaky faucet. Probably just a package. But when Bara opened the door, her heart dropped into her stomach. Susan Fraser stood in the hallway like a storm dressed in designer clothes. Tall, sharp-featured, with platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon, she looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread titled Ice Queens of the Upper East Side. Her blue eyes, so like Harry's but without any of their warmth, swept over Bara with the kind of assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions. "You must be the wife," Susan said. her crisp Australian accent turning the words into something that sounded vaguely insulting. "Mrs. Fraser," Bara managed, stepping back instinctively. "Harry didn't mention you were coming. Harry didn't know. I believe in surprises." Susan brushed past Bara into the apartment without being invited, her expensive perfume overwhelming the small space. How quaint. The way she said it made quaint sound like a disease. "Mum." Harry emerged from the bathroom, wrench still in hand, his face cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been dread. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, darling." Susan air-kissed Harry's cheeks, careful not to actually touch him. "I decided it was time to meet your bride. You've been so secretive about her." "I haven't been secretive, I just live in this tiny hovel, apparently," Susan continued, her gaze cataloguing every second-hand piece of furniture, every scuff mark on the walls, every sign of their carefully budgeted life. "Harry, surely you can afford better than this." Bara felt heat rise in her cheeks. This apartment was their sanctuary, their first home together, filled with love and laughter and dreams for the future. To hear it dismissed so casually made her want to defend it fiercely. "We like it here," she said quietly. Susan's attention snapped to Bara like a predator scenting prey. "Do you? How interesting. Most women would want their husbands to provide better." "Mum," Harry's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm simply making conversation." Susan settled herself on their small couch like a queen claiming a throne. "So, Bara, tell me about yourself." "What do you do?" "I work for a non-profit. We help disadvantaged children access educational opportunities." "How noble. And I suppose it pays, what, 30,000 a year?" 35. "Mum, that's enough." But Susan was just getting started. "I'm simply trying to understand how my son has found himself in this situation. A tiny apartment, a wife with no family connections, no real prospects." "I have prospects," Bara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Do you? And what family do you come from, dear? Harry has been remarkably vague about your background." The questions came like surgical strikes, each one designed to probe and expose. Where had she gone to school? What did her parents do? Why were there no family photos in the apartment? Did she have any siblings, any relatives at all? Bara answered with the lies she'd perfected, but Susan's eyes never stopped moving, cataloguing, calculating. It was like being interrogated by a beautiful, well-dressed detective. "An orphan," Susan said finally, as if summing up a case file. "How tragic. No family money, no connections, nothing to offer my son except—" Her gaze raked over Bara insultingly. "Well, I suppose we all know what that is." "Susan," Harry's voice was steel now. "What? She's a pretty girl, Harry. I'm sure that's very satisfying for you. But marriage is about more than physical attraction. It's about building a life, creating stability, having children who will be raised properly." "We are building a life," Bara said. "In Queens? In a studio apartment? What happens when you want children, dear? Where will you put them?" Bara opened her mouth to respond, but Susan wasn't finished. "Of course children require financial stability. They need proper schools, proper clothes, proper opportunities. I suppose Harry will be working 2 jobs soon enough to afford even the basics." Each word was a calculated cut, designed to make Bara feel small, inadequate, like a burden her husband would eventually resent. And the worst part was that Susan delivered every insult with a smile, as if she were simply being helpful. Harry sat down beside Bara, his hand finding hers. "Mum, why are you really here? Can't a mother visit her son? You could have called first. I wanted to see how you were living, and now I have." Susan's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I'll be staying at the plaza, of course. I assume you'll join me for dinner tomorrow night, both of you?" It wasn't a request. After Susan left, With promises to get to know Bara better over the coming weeks, Harry and Bara sat in silence on their couch. The apartment felt smaller somehow, contaminated by Susan's presence and cruel observations. "I'm sorry," Harry said finally. "You don't need to apologize for your mother." "Yeah, I do. She was completely out of line." Harry turned to face her. "Bara, you know none of what she said matters to me, right? I don't care about money or family connections or any of that bullshit. I love you. This life we've built, it's perfect." Bara leaned into his embrace, but Susan's words echoed in her mind. What would Harry think if he knew that his wife could buy the Plaza Hotel where his mother was staying? That she had more family connections than anyone in New York? That every financial worry he carried could be erased with a single phone call? "She hates me," Bara said. "She doesn't know you. When she does, she's not going to give me a chance to let her know me, Harry. She's made up her mind." Harry was quiet for a long moment. "She's protective of me. After Dad died, it was just us for a long time. She sacrificed a lot to make sure I had opportunities." "What kind of sacrifices?" Harry's jaw tightened. "She worked multiple jobs, took on debt for my education. When I graduated college, she moved to Australia for a fresh start. She's been building a new life there." But Bara heard what he didn't say. Susan Fraser was the kind of woman who kept score, who expected gratitude and obedience in return for her sacrifices. She'd raised Harry to feel responsible for her happiness, and now Bara was threatening that carefully constructed dynamic. That night, as they lay in bed, Harry held Bara closer than usual. "Promise me something," he whispered in the dark. "Anything. Don't let her get to you. Whatever she says, whatever she does, remember that I chose you, not because you're convenient or easy or expected, because you're you, because you make me better, because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Bara pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, memorizing the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. "I promise." But promises made in the dark had a way of crumbling in the light, and Susan Fraser had brought more than designer luggage with her from Australia. She'd brought poison, the kind that worked slowly and methodically, turning love into doubt and doubt into destruction. As Bara finally drifted off to sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that her perfect life had just taken its first step toward falling apart. And the worst part was, she was right. Chapter 4. Seeds of Doubt. 3 weeks after Susan's arrival, Bara began to notice the way Harry looked at her, like he was seeing a stranger wearing his wife's face. It started small, innocent questions that felt like accusations wrapped in curiosity. Why didn't Bara ever talk about her childhood friends? How could someone with no family afford the nice clothes she occasionally wore? Where exactly did the money in their joint account come from? Bara sat at her kitchen table on a Friday evening, staring at the latest gift from her trust fund, a check for $5,000 that she'd carefully deposited in small increments over several months. To Harry, it was a miracle. To her, it was a fraction of what she spent monthly on security she didn't even know she had. The check felt like evidence now, proof of the lies she'd been living. She could still remember the first time she'd deposited money from her trust fund, how carefully she'd crafted the story about her aunt's inheritance, how guilty she'd felt watching Harry's face light up with relief that they could finally afford the couch they'd been saving for. "Hey, beautiful!" Harry's voice made her jump. He was standing in the doorway, but instead of his usual warm smile, his expression was troubled. "Hi," she said, quickly closing her laptop. "How was work?" "Fine. Listen, we need to talk." The 4 words every married person dreaded. Bara felt ice crystallize in her veins as Harry sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly on the table. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was set like he was preparing for battle. "My mother called today." "Oh." Bara kept her voice neutral, but inside, sirens were blaring. She's concerned about you, about us. What kind of concerns? Harry ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Bara recognized as his way of handling stress. She'd seen him do it before work presentations, before difficult phone calls with clients. Now he was doing it because of her. She hired a private investigator. The world tilted sideways. She what? I know how it sounds, but she's just looking out for me. After Dad died, she became protective. Sometimes too protective, but her heart's in the right place. Bara's mouth felt like cotton. A private investigator. How much had they found? How much was still hidden behind the walls Alexander Blackwood had built around his daughter's identity? What did they find? She asked, proud that her voice remained steady. Harry pulled out a thin file from beside his chair. When had he prepared this? How long had he been planning this conversation? That's just it. Not much. Your employment records check out, your apartment history is clean, but... Harry leaned forward, opening the file. Bara, there's no record of you before you turned 18. No school records, no childhood medical records, no social media presence. It's like you didn't exist until you became an adult. Bara's mind raced. Her father's people were good, but not perfect. Of course, there would be gaps. Deliberate gaps designed to protect her, but gaps that would look suspicious to anyone really looking. My foster family wasn't great about keeping records, she said. I bounced around a lot after my parents died. Foster family? You told me you were raised by your aunt? The contradiction hit like a physical blow. Bara had been so careful to keep her story straight, but months of living dual lives was taking its toll. The lies were becoming harder to track, harder to maintain under increasing scrutiny. My aunt placed me in foster care when she got sick. I didn't like talking about it because it was painful. Harry studied her face with an intensity that made her squirm. She could see him cataloguing her expressions, looking for tells, for signs of deception. When had her husband become an interrogator? Why didn't you tell me this before? Because it's not exactly first date conversation. Hi, I'm Bara. I was orphaned at 5 and spent my teens in the system. Would you have asked me for coffee if I'd led with that? Of course I would have. But there was something in Harry's voice that suggested doubt, a hesitation that hadn't been there before Susan's arrival. Over the next week, the questions multiplied like a virus, spreading through their relationship. Susan had planted seeds, and Harry was watering them with increasing suspicion. Why did Bara never check social media? Why didn't she have any childhood friends? How had she learned to cook French cuisine if she'd grown up in foster care? Each question felt like a small betrayal, a sign that the man who'd once trusted her completely was now examining every aspect of her life for flaws and inconsistencies. I watch cooking shows, Bara explained, her patience wearing thin. But you said you didn't have cable growing up. Public television, Julia Child reruns. Harry nodded, but Bara could see him filing away another small inconsistency. Susan was playing a masterful game, never directly accusing Bara of lying, but creating an atmosphere where every answer led to more questions, where love was slowly being suffocated by doubt. The worst part was watching Harry struggle with his own suspicions. She could see the war playing out on his face, love battling against growing mistrust, the desire to believe her fighting against mounting evidence that something wasn't right. Bara, he said one evening as they lay in bed, their usual intimacy replaced by careful distance. If there was something about your past you were afraid to tell me, you know you could trust me with it, right? The opening was there, a chance to tell him everything. But how could she explain that her father was worth more than most small countries? That she'd been living in hiding since childhood because people wanted to kill her for money? that their entire relationship existed because she'd been pretending to be someone else. "There's nothing," she said instead, and felt another piece of their marriage die. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when Barra returned from work to find Harry sitting on their couch with a manila folder in his hands, his face pale and strained. "What's that?" she asked, though her heart already knew. "More information from the PI." Harry's voice was tight, controlled in a way that scared her more than shouting would have. "Barra, I need you to be honest with me. The woman who gave your reference at your last job, she says she's never heard of you." Barra felt the walls closing in. Her father's people had created a backstory, but it wasn't perfect. There were bound to be cracks, especially under the kind of professional scrutiny Susan was applying. "That's impossible. Jennifer Morrison was my supervisor at..." Jennifer Morrison moved to Seattle 2 years ago. The woman who answered the phone at that number has never worked with anyone named Barra Jones. The room spun. Somewhere someone had made a mistake, a phone number that hadn't been properly redirected, a detail that hadn't been perfectly crafted, the kind of small error that could bring down an entire house of cards. "There has to be an explanation," Barra said desperately. "There is." Harry stood up, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked at her like she was a stranger. "You're lying to me. About your job history, about your family, about who you are. The question is why. Harry, please, are you married to someone else? In witness protection? Running from the law?" His voice rose with each question, months of suppressed doubt finally erupting. "Because that's what people do when they create fake identities, Barra. They run from something." "I'm not running from anything." "Then explain it to me. Explain why my wife's entire life story reads like fiction." Barra opened her mouth, but no words came. How could she explain without revealing everything? How could she tell him that she'd lied because the truth was too dangerous, too complicated, too enormous for their small, perfect life? "I can't," she whispered. The words fell between them like a death sentence. Harry's face went through a series of emotions: hurt, anger, betrayal, and finally, something worse than all of them: doubt. "My mother was right," he said quietly. "She said there was something off about you from the beginning, said women like you always have an angle." "Women like me," Barra's voice was sharp now. "Women who marry men they barely know. Women who have no past, no family, no real connections. Women who show up out of nowhere and expect to be trusted." Each word was a knife, perfectly aimed to cause maximum damage. Barra could see Susan's influence in every syllable, the way Harry's natural protective instincts had been twisted into suspicion. "So what now?" Barra asked. "You've decided I'm some kind of con artist, that our entire marriage is a lie." "I don't know what to think anymore." Harry sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. "I love you, Barra, but I can't build a life with someone I don't really know, someone who won't trust me with the truth." The defeat in his voice was worse than anger. It meant he was giving up, that Susan's campaign had finally achieved its goal. "The truth isn't always simple." "Yes, it is," Harry exploded, his control finally snapping. "It's the simplest thing in the world. You tell the person you love who you really are. You don't build a relationship on lies and half-truths and made-up stories." Barra stared at her husband, this man she loved more than her own life, and realized that Susan had won. Not through dramatic confrontation or obvious manipulation, but through the slow, steady erosion of trust. Drop by drop, question by question, until the foundation of their marriage had cracked beyond repair. "I'm going to stay at my mother's hotel tonight," Harry said, his voice hollow. "I need time to think." "Harry, don't go. Please. We can work through this." "Can we? Because right now I don't even know who I'm married to." He packed a bag, while Barra stood frozen in their bedroom doorway, watching the man she loved prepare to leave her. Every item he folded into his suitcase felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. When he reached the front door, he turned back one more time, and for a moment, she saw the man she'd fallen in love with, vulnerable, hurting, desperate to believe in something real. "If you decide you want to tell me the real truth, you know where to find me." Then he was gone, and Bara was alone in their apartment that suddenly felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. She called her father that night, sobbing into the phone about how everything was falling apart. "Come home," Alexander said simply. "End this charade before it destroys you completely." "I can't. I love him, Papa." "Love isn't enough when it's built on lies, sweetheart. And Susan Fraser is just getting started." As Bara hung up the phone, she realized her father was right. Susan was just getting started. And the worst part was, Bara had given her all the ammunition she needed. The truth was a weapon, and in the wrong hands, it could destroy everything. Chapter 5. The humiliation begins. Saturday evening arrived like an executioner's blade, sharp and inevitable, draped in the elegant facade of a family dinner that would serve as Bara's public crucifixion. The restaurant Susan had chosen, Le Bernardin, with its pristine white tablecloths and astronomical prices, felt like a stage set for maximum humiliation. Bara stood in the marble-clad restroom, staring at her reflection and trying to convince herself she could survive the next 2 hours. Harry had returned to their apartment the night before, but the easy intimacy they'd shared was gone. He spoke to her with careful politeness, like she was a stranger he was obligated to be kind to. When he'd mentioned his mother's dinner invitation, more like a command performance, Bara had wanted to refuse, but backing down would only confirm Susan's narrative that she was weak, unworthy, hiding something shameful. "You look beautiful," Harry had said that evening as they prepared to leave, but his voice held none of its usual warmth. "Thank you," Bara replied, smoothing down the simple black dress she'd chosen, elegant but not flashy, hoping to strike some impossible balance between looking appropriate and not appearing to be above her supposed station. Now, studying herself in the restaurant's mirrors, she wondered if she should have worn something even more modest. Every detail would be scrutinized, weaponized, turned into evidence of her inadequacy. When she emerged from the restroom, Harry was waiting by their table, where Susan sat surrounded by 5 other family members Bara had never met. Harry's Aunt Patricia, Uncle Robert, and their 3 adult children. Susan had orchestrated this perfectly, ensuring Bara would be outnumbered, examined, judged by a jury of strangers who'd already heard Susan's version of events. "There she is," Susan announced as Bara approached. "Everyone, this is Bara, Harry's wife." The way she said wife made it sound like a temporary condition. "Lovely to meet you, dear," Patricia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was Susan's younger sister, with the same sharp features and assessing gaze. "Susan has told us so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Bara replied, taking her seat next to Harry. "Of course," Susan said sweetly. "I was just explaining to everyone how you met at that charity event where you were working as waitstaff. How romantic." The words carried just enough emphasis to make Bara's job sound slightly sordid, like she'd been hunting for wealthy men to seduce. Several family members exchanged glances. "Charity work is noble," Uncle Robert said diplomatically. "What organization was it again?" "The Children's Education Foundation," Bara replied. "Oh yes," Susan continued, "though I understand you weren't actually employed by the foundation itself, just hired as temporary help for the evening, rather different from being involved in their actual work." Another small distortion, another way to make Bara seem grasping and opportunistic. The truth, that she'd been volunteering while disguised as hired help, would sound absurd if she tried to explain it. As the evening progressed, Susan's attacks became more pointed, When the waiter brought wine that cost more per glass than most people spent on groceries, Susan made sure to mention how overwhelming fine dining must be for someone from Barra's background. When conversation turned to education, Susan expressed surprise that Barra seemed so well-read, considering her unconventional schooling situation. "Tell us about your family," Patricia said during the main course. Susan mentioned there was some tragedy. Barra launched into her carefully constructed story about orphaned parents and foster care, but Susan was ready with follow-up questions that poked holes in every detail. "It's so sad that you have no photos, no mementos," Susan said with mock sympathy. "Nothing to remember them by, almost like they never existed at all." "Some people process grief differently," Harry said quietly, the first time he'd defended her all evening. "Of course, darling, though it is unusual for someone to have absolutely no connection to their past. No childhood friends, no former teachers, no one from their life before meeting you." Susan's blue eyes glittered with malice. "It makes one wonder what someone might be trying to forget or hide." Barra felt heat creep up her neck. "I prefer to focus on the future rather than dwelling on painful memories." "How convenient," Susan murmured. The conversation moved to careers, and Susan made sure everyone understood the vast difference between Harry's promising trajectory in marketing and Barra's little non-profit job. "It's wonderful that you're passionate about helping children," Robert said, "though I imagine the salary is quite modest." "Money isn't everything," Barra replied. "Easy to say when someone else is providing for you," Susan observed. "Harry works so hard to support you both, though I suppose that tiny apartment must feel quite cramped by now." "We're happy with our home," Barra said firmly. "For now, perhaps. But what happens when you want to start a family? Children need space, good schools, opportunities. They need fathers who can provide more than love alone." The implication was clear. Barra was a financial burden who would drag Harry down, limit his potential, trap him in mediocrity. "Harry is an excellent provider," Barra said, her voice rising slightly. "Is he? Because from what I understand, you've been helping with expenses using money from some mysterious inheritance. Rather convenient that this windfall appeared right when you needed it most." The table went quiet. This was Susan's masterstroke, taking Barra's trust fund distributions and making them sound suspicious, possibly fraudulent. "My aunt left me a small inheritance," Barra said carefully. "Yes, so you've said, though it's interesting that there's no record of this aunt in any official documents, no will filed in any court system my investigator could find." The words hit like physical blows. Susan had done her homework, and Barra's carefully constructed cover story was crumbling in real time. "Maybe your investigator didn't look hard enough," Barra said, but her voice sounded weak even to her own ears. "Or maybe there's nothing to find," Susan replied smoothly, "because this aunt never existed, just like everything else about your supposed background." Harry's hand tightened around his wineglass. Barra could feel his eyes on her, could sense his growing doubt and confusion. "I think that's enough," he said quietly. "Is it, darling? Because I'm simply concerned about your future. You're a successful, educated, handsome man with unlimited potential. You deserve a partner who can match your ambitions, who can help you build the life you've dreamed of." Susan's voice softened with maternal concern. "Instead, you've tied yourself to someone who brings nothing to the marriage except secrets and lies." "Susan, stop," Patricia said uncomfortably. But Susan wasn't finished. "Look around this table, Harry. Your cousins married well, partners with family connections, financial stability, the ability to open doors and create opportunities. What has your wife given you except debt and questions about her identity?" Barra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the marble floor. Every eye in the restaurant seemed to turn toward their table, drawn by the sound and the tension crackling in the air. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely controlled. "I need some air." She walked to the restaurant's entrance on unsteady legs, past other diners who whispered behind their hands about the drama playing out at table 12. Outside, she leaned against the building's limestone facade and tried to remember how to breathe. Harry found her there 10 minutes later. "Bara, don't." She held up a hand to stop him. "Just don't." She was out of line in there. Was she? Because everything she said is true, isn't it? I don't have family photos or childhood friends or records that prove my story. I can't explain where my money comes from or why my past is so conveniently mysterious. Harry stood there in his expensive suit, bought with money that was ultimately hers, though he didn't know it, and said nothing. "You believe her," Bara said softly. "You think I'm lying about everything?" "I think." Harry ran his hands through his hair. "I think I don't know what to believe anymore." The space between them felt like an ocean. 6 months ago, they would have laughed about Susan's obvious manipulation, would have gone home and made love and planned their future. Now they stood like strangers, too proud and too hurt and too confused to bridge the gap. "I should go," Bara said. "Where?" "I don't know. Somewhere that isn't here." She walked away from her husband, from the restaurant where she'd been publicly dismantled, from the life she'd thought they were building together. Behind her she could hear Harry calling her name, but she didn't turn around. Some humiliations cut too deep for immediate forgiveness, and Susan Fraser, Bara realized, was just getting started. Chapter 6. The Poison Spreads. 2 weeks after the dinner disaster, Bara woke up in her own bed to find Harry already gone and a note on his pillow. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." It was the 4th note in as many days. Harry was avoiding her, coming home after she was asleep and leaving before she woke up. When they did cross paths, their conversations were stilted, formal, like diplomats from warring nations forced to share the same embassy. Bara dressed for work in the growing darkness of their emotional winter, choosing clothes that had become armor against the slow destruction of her marriage. The coffee cup necklace Harry had given her for their 6-month anniversary felt heavy against her throat, a reminder of happier times that seemed like they'd happened to other people. The apartment felt different now, contaminated by suspicion and doubt. Even their bed, once a sanctuary of love and passion, had become a battleground where they lay on opposite sides, careful not to touch, afraid that contact might force conversations neither was ready to have. At work, she threw herself into the children's program with desperate intensity. If she couldn't save her marriage, at least she could save something. But even there, Susan's poison was spreading. "Bara, I need to speak with you," Janet called her into the office that afternoon. "Of course." Janet closed the door behind them, her expression troubled. "I received a strange phone call this morning. Someone claiming to be conducting a background check on you for a potential new position." Bara's blood turned to ice. "What kind of background check?" "They were asking about your employment history, your qualifications, whether you'd ever given any indication of financial irregularities." Susan. It had to be Susan, continuing her campaign to destroy every corner of Bara's life. "I haven't applied for any new positions," Bara said carefully. "I know. That's what made the call so strange. When I told them that, they seemed surprised. They said they'd been told you were looking to leave because of some kind of personal financial pressure." The lies were getting more elaborate, more specifically designed to damage. Susan wasn't just questioning Bara's past anymore. She was actively sabotaging her present, trying to make her appear unstable, dishonest, possibly criminal. "I'm not leaving," Bara said firmly. "I love this job." "Good, because I'd hate to lose you. But Bara, is everything okay at home? You've seemed distracted lately." How could she explain that her marriage was dying by degrees, that every day brought new accusations, new suspicions, new evidence that the man she loved was losing faith in everything they'd built together? "Just some family stress," she said. "If you need time off, no. Work is the one thing keeping me sane right now." That evening, Bara came home to find Susan sitting in their living room like she owned the place, a cup of tea in her hands and a satisfied smile on her lips. She'd made herself completely at home, shoes off, feet tucked under her, looking through a photo album that Bara recognized as one of their wedding photos. "Hello, dear," Susan said pleasantly, not looking up from the album. "I hope you don't mind. Harry gave me a key." Bara set down her purse with careful control. "Where is Harry?" "Running errands. He'll be back soon. I thought this would be a perfect opportunity for us to have a little chat. Woman to woman." Susan held up one of the wedding photos. Bara and Harry kissing outside the courthouse, both of them laughing with pure joy. Such a lovely ceremony. Though I have to say, it's unusual for a bride not to have any family present. Not even one relative or friend from her past. Another calculated cut. Susan had been studying every detail of their relationship, looking for ammunition. About what? About what's best for my son. Susan set down her teacup with deliberate precision. "You're destroying him, you know. Day by day, lie by lie. He's losing weight, losing sleep, losing his ability to trust his own judgment." It was true, and that made it hurt worse. Bara had watched Harry deteriorate over the past 2 weeks, saw the way he'd started double-checking everything she said, the way he looked at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't solve. "That's not my fault." "Isn't it? You've built your entire relationship on deception. Harry is a good man, honest, trusting, the kind who believes the best of people, but even he has limits." Bara remained standing, unwilling to sit and give Susan any illusion of equality in this conversation. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to disappear." Susan's voice was calm, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather. "Pack your things, take whatever money you've been stealing." "I haven't stolen anything." "And vanish from Harry's life. Let him heal from whatever spell you've cast over him." "I love your son." "No, you don't. People who love each other don't lie to each other. They don't build relationships on false foundations. They don't make the people they claim to care about question their own sanity." Susan stood, moving closer until Bara could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something sharper, the scent of absolute conviction. "You know what I think?" Susan continued. "I think you're exactly what you appear to be, a con artist who saw a lonely, successful man and decided to take him for everything he's worth. The mysterious inheritance, the tragic background, the convenient lack of any verifiable history, it's textbook predatory behavior. You're wrong. Am I? Then prove it. Show me one piece of documentation that confirms your story, one person from your past who can vouch for you. One shred of evidence that Bara Jones actually existed before she met my son." The challenge hung in the air like a sword. Bara could produce that evidence, of course. One phone call to her father and Susan would have more documentation than she could read in a lifetime, but revealing her true identity would destroy everything she'd built with Harry just as surely as Susan's lies were doing. "I don't have to prove anything to you." "No, but you do have to prove it to Harry. And we both know you can't, don't we?" Susan moved to the mantelpiece, picking up another photo, this one of Harry and Bara on their honeymoon weekend in the Catskills, staying at a cheap motel, but looking happier than royalty. "He deserves so much better than this," Susan said, her voice taking on a maternal sadness. "Harry has always been such a giving person, always putting others before himself. After his father died, he worked 2 jobs to pay off debts that weren't even his responsibility. He's the kind of man who would sacrifice everything for love, even if that love is built on lies. The front door opened, and Harry walked in carrying grocery bags. He stopped short when he saw them facing off in the living room like gunslingers at dawn. "What's going on?" he asked warily. "Just getting to know my daughter-in-law better," Susan said sweetly. "We were discussing her plans for the future." Harry looked between them, and Barra could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The constant tension was wearing him down, aging him in ways that broke her heart. There were new lines around his eyes, a tightness to his mouth that hadn't been there before Susan's arrival. "Mum, I thought we agreed you'd call before coming over. I wanted to surprise you with dinner. I bought all the ingredients for your favorite meal." And just like that, Susan transformed from interrogator to devoted mother, bustling around their tiny kitchen as if she belonged there. She'd brought expensive ingredients, organic vegetables, premium cuts of meat, wine that cost more than Harry made in a week. "You don't have to cook for us," Barra said. "Nonsense. I love taking care of my family." Susan's emphasis on "my family" was subtle but clear. Barra was not included in that sacred circle. During dinner, Susan regaled them with stories of Harry's childhood, painting pictures of a perfect mother-son bond that had no room for outsiders. She talked about his achievements, his potential, his bright future, always in terms that subtly excluded Barra from the equation. "Remember when you wanted to be an architect?" Susan said, refilling Harry's wineglass. "You had such grand plans for designing beautiful buildings that would stand for centuries." "I was 12, Mum, but you had vision, still do. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if you'd pursued that dream instead of settling for, well, your current situation." Another perfectly aimed dart. Harry's marketing job was comfortable but not prestigious, and he'd been talking about maybe starting his own firm someday. In Susan's narrative, everything good about Harry's life had been compromised since Barra entered the picture. "I'm happy with my choices," Harry said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Are you? Because happiness and settling aren't the same thing, darling. And I wonder sometimes if you've forgotten the difference." After Susan left, with promises to return soon and continue helping with the household, Harry and Barra sat in silence on their couch. The distance between them felt oceanic. "She's trying to destroy us," Barra said quietly. "She's trying to protect me." "From what? From being loved? From being happy?" Harry turned to look at her, and Barra saw something in his eyes that terrified her. The growing seed of doubt that Susan had planted was taking root, spreading through their relationship like a cancer. "Are you happy, Barra?" "Really? Because sometimes I feel like you're performing happiness rather than living it." The words hit like a physical blow. How could she explain that every moment of happiness felt stolen, borrowed from a life she had no right to claim? That she loved him so much it sometimes hurt to breathe, but that love was built on a foundation of necessary lies. "I'm happy when you stop interrogating me," she said instead. "I'm not interrogating you. I'm trying to understand who I'm married to." "You know who you're married to. You've known me for almost a year." "Have I? Because the woman I fell in love with was open, honest, real. Lately, I feel like I'm living with a stranger who looks like my wife but guards every word, every gesture, every emotion." Barra wanted to scream that she was still the same person, that Susan's poison was making him see shadows where none existed. But how could she fight an enemy who used the truth as a weapon? How could she defend against accusations that were technically accurate, even if the reasons behind her secrecy were nothing like what Susan imagined? "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "Neither do I," Harry replied. And for the first time since their wedding day, neither of them said, "I love you," before going to bed. That night, Barra lay awake, listening to Harry's breathing and feeling their marriage slip away like sand through her fingers. Susan's campaign was working perfectly. slow, methodical, designed to turn Harry's love into doubt and doubt into resentment. And the worst part was, Barra could stop it all with a single phone call to her father. But revealing the truth would end their marriage just as surely as Susan's lies were doing. Either way, she was losing the only thing that had ever mattered to her. Either way, Susan Fraser was winning. Chapter 7. Breaking Point. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under their apartment door like a death sentence disguised as correspondence. Barra found it when she stumbled to the kitchen for coffee, still wearing Harry's Columbia t-shirt and trying to pretend that sleeping in separate rooms for the past week was just a temporary adjustment. The envelope was cream-colored, expensive, with her name written in Susan's precise handwriting. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photograph showed a man in an expensive suit getting into a black sedan outside Blackwood Industries headquarters. The man's face was turned away from the camera, but the body language was unmistakably familiar. The note was written in Susan's elegant script. "Interesting company your wife keeps. Perhaps Harry should know who his wife really meets with during her work emergencies." Barra's hands shook as she stared at the image. It wasn't her. She hadn't been to her father's building in months, not since before Susan arrived. But the woman in the photo had her height, her build, her hair color. From behind, in the grainy surveillance photo, it would be impossible to tell the difference. Susan had hired someone to pose as her. The calculated cruelty of it took her breath away. This wasn't just manipulation, it was fraud, carefully orchestrated to provide the final piece of evidence Harry would need to justify walking away from their marriage. "What's that?" Harry's voice made her jump. He stood in the kitchen doorway, already dressed for work, his hair damp from the shower. The distance between them felt like a chasm. Gone were the days when he would have wrapped his arms around her from behind, when they would have shared lazy morning conversations over coffee. "Nothing," Barra said, quickly folding the photo and note. "Just junk mail." But she wasn't fast enough. Harry's eyes had caught the movement, the guilty way she tried to hide the papers. "Let me see it." "Harry, it's nothing." "Let me see it, Barra." His voice carried a weight of authority she'd never heard before, the tone of a man who'd reached the end of his patience. When she hesitated, he stepped forward and gently but firmly took the papers from her hands. Barra watched his face change as he absorbed the image and Susan's carefully crafted insinuation. Confusion first, then recognition of the building, then something much worse: betrayal. "Blackwood Industries," he said quietly, his voice hollow with defeat. "Alexander Blackwood's company." "Harry, I can explain." "Can you? Because this looks like you meeting with one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, the same CEO whose charity gala is where we supposedly met when you were working as temporary staff." The web of implications was clear. If Barra had connections to Alexander Blackwood, if she'd been lying about her role at the charity event, if she had access to resources she'd never admitted to, everything about their relationship was built on deception. "It's not what it looks like," Barra said desperately, but even to her own ears, the words sounded hollow. "Then what is it? Because, from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has been lying to me about everything from the moment we met." Harry set the photograph on the kitchen counter like evidence in a trial. In the morning light streaming through their windows, Barra could see how young the woman in the photo looked. Probably an actress Susan had hired, someone with roughly Barra's build and coloring. "That's not me in the photo." "Isn't it? Because it sure looks like you. Same height, same hair, same coat I've seen you wear. Someone set this up to look like me." Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was bitter, broken, the laugh of a man who'd been pushed beyond his breaking point. "Right. Someone who looks exactly like you just happened to be photographed outside Alexander Blackwood's building, and someone just happened to slip this photo under our door. What a coincidence." "Your mother..." Don't blame my mother for this, Bara. She's not the one lying. The accusation hung between them like a blade. Bara could see everything they'd built together crumbling in real time, destroyed by Susan's masterful manipulation and her own inability to tell the truth. "I have never lied to you about anything that matters," she said. "Haven't you? Because our entire relationship is starting to feel like a lie. Your mysterious inheritance, your convenient lack of family, your job that somehow pays well enough for you to contribute thousands to our savings, none of it adds up." Harry started pacing their small kitchen, his movements sharp with frustration and pain. The space that had once felt cozy now seemed cramped, claustrophobic, like a prison they'd built around their failing marriage. "I defended you," he continued, his voice gaining strength as his rage built. "When my mother raised questions, when the PI found inconsistencies, when everything about your story seemed too convenient, I defended you because I loved you, because I trusted you. You can still trust me, can I? Because right now I feel like I don't know you at all, like I've been married to a stranger for 8 months. Bara felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't fix this. Nothing would fix this except the truth, and the truth would destroy them just as surely as the lies were doing. "What do you want me to say, Harry?" "I want you to tell me who you really are. I want you to explain how a woman with no family connections and a non-profit salary can afford designer clothes and expensive jewelry. I want you to tell me why there's no record of your existence before you turned 18. I want you to explain that photograph and why you're apparently meeting with billionaire CEOs while lying to your husband about working late." Each demand was reasonable, logical, the kind of questions any husband would ask when faced with evidence of his wife's deception. But each one was also impossible for Bara to answer without revealing everything. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being accused of exactly what she was guilty of: living a lie, hiding her true identity, deceiving the man she loved. The fact that her reasons were different from what Susan imagined didn't make the accusations any less accurate. "And if I can't give you those explanations?" Harry stopped pacing and looked at her with eyes that held 8 months of love dying in real time. "Then I guess we both know where this marriage is headed." The silence that followed was deafening. Bara could hear the radiator clicking, the traffic outside their window, the normal sounds of a life that was falling apart at the seams. "I need to get to work," Harry said finally. "Harry, please, don't leave like this." "I can't do this anymore, Bara. I can't live with someone I don't trust, someone who won't trust me enough to tell me the truth." He grabbed his jacket and briefcase, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd made a decision. "Where will you stay tonight?" Bara asked, already knowing the answer. "My mother's hotel, until I figure out what comes next." "And us?" "Our marriage." Harry paused in the doorway, his hand on the knob, and for a moment Bara thought he might turn around, might cross the room and hold her, and tell her they could work through anything together. Instead, he said, "I don't know if there is an us anymore." Then he was gone, and Bara was alone in their apartment, with the evidence of Susan's latest victory spread across the kitchen counter. She picked up the photograph, studying the woman who'd been used to destroy her marriage. From behind, the resemblance was convincing enough to plant doubt, to provide the final piece of evidence that Harry needed to justify walking away. Bara had to admire Susan's strategy. It was elegant, efficient, designed to exploit every weakness in Bara's carefully constructed cover story. Susan understood that the truth was Bara's enemy, that any investigation would reveal inconsistencies that looked damning, even if they weren't. Her phone buzzed, a text from Harry. "I'm staying at the plaza with Mum for a few days. We both need space to think." Space to think. As if distance would somehow make the lies more palatable, the deception more forgivable. Bara sank onto their couch, the same couch where they'd made love just 2 weeks ago, where they'd planned their future and whispered promises in the dark. Now it felt like furniture in a museum, artifacts from a marriage that had already ended in everything but name. She could call her father. Alexander Blackwood could have investigators expose Susan's manipulations within hours. He could provide documentation that would explain every mystery, answer every question, prove Barra's innocence of any real wrongdoing. But it would also prove her guilt of the one thing that mattered most, lying to the man she loved about who she really was, and that, Barra realized, was a crime she couldn't explain away, no matter how much evidence her father provided. She was trapped between two versions of the truth, and both would destroy her marriage. Susan Fraser had won. Chapter 8. The Slap That Changed Everything. 5 days after Harry moved to the Plaza Hotel, Barra came home to find their apartment door unlocked and voices shouting inside. She paused in the hallway, her pulse racing as she recognized Harry's voice raised in anger and Susan's crisp Australian accent cutting through his words like a blade. This was it, the confrontation she'd been dreading since the photograph arrived, the final act of Susan's carefully orchestrated destruction. The hallway felt endless as she approached their door, each step bringing her closer to what she knew would be the end of everything. She could hear fragments of their argument through the thin walls, accusations, denials, the sound of papers being scattered. Taking a deep breath, Barra opened the door and stepped into what had once been her sanctuary. Harry stood in the middle of their living room, his tie loosened and his hair disheveled, holding a manila folder in his hands. His face was flushed with rage and something worse, betrayal so deep it had carved new lines around his eyes. She'd never seen him like this before, wild-eyed and desperate, like a cornered animal. Susan sat on their couch like a queen holding court, perfectly composed in her designer suit, watching the destruction she'd orchestrated with satisfied eyes. There was something almost orgasmic about her expression, the pure pleasure of watching her carefully laid plans come to fruition. "Barra," Harry said when he saw her, his voice hoarse from shouting. "Perfect timing." The folder in his hands was thick, official-looking, with papers spilling out of it like blood from a wound. Barra felt ice form in her veins as she realized what it must contain. "What is that?" she asked, though she already knew. "Everything," Harry said, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "Everything you've been hiding from me for 8 months." He threw the folder onto their coffee table with such force that their small lamp jumped, and papers scattered across the surface like evidence at a crime scene. Barra caught glimpses of bank statements with numbers that would make most people dizzy, property records showing assets worth millions, photographs of her at charity galas where tickets cost more than most people's cars, her life laid bare in black and white. "Alexander Blackwood," Harry continued, his voice gaining strength as his rage built. "Your father, one of the most powerful men in America, and you're his daughter, his heir, his billion-dollar princess." The words hung in the air like an accusation, each syllable carefully enunciated to cause maximum damage. "Harry, don't!" He held up a hand to stop her, and she could see it trembling with barely controlled fury. "Don't you dare try to lie your way out of this. It's all here, Barra. Birth certificate listing Alexander Blackwood as your father. Trust fund documents showing monthly transfers of more money than I make in a year. Private school records from institutions that cost more than most people's houses. Everything you've been lying about since the day we met." Barra looked at Susan, who was watching the scene unfold with barely concealed glee. The older woman had positioned herself perfectly to observe every emotion, every crack in their marriage, like a scientist studying the destruction of her own creation. "How?" Barra managed to ask. "Does it matter?" Susan asked pleasantly, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "The point is, my son finally knows who he really married. A liar, a fraud, a woman who's been playing games with his heart while laughing at him behind his back." "That's not true," Barra said desperately. turning back to Harry. "Harry, you have to believe me. I never laughed at you. I never treated this like a game. You never what? Lied to me. Because that's literally all you've done." Harry's voice cracked with emotion. 8 months of love curdling into bitter betrayal. 8 months, Barra. 8 months of watching me worry about money while you could have bought this entire building with pocket change. 8 months of letting me work extra hours to pay for things you could have funded without thinking twice. She could see him remembering every time he'd apologized for not being able to afford something nicer, every time he'd worked late to earn extra money, every moment of financial stress that she could have erased with a single phone call. "I wanted us to be normal." "Normal?" Harry laughed, but the sound was bitter and broken. "Nothing about this is normal. Normal people don't create fake identities. Normal people don't lie to their spouses about who they are. Normal people don't marry someone while pretending to be a completely different person." Barra could see 8 months of love and trust dying before her eyes, replaced by hurt so deep it was transforming Harry into someone she didn't recognize. The kind, gentle man she'd married was disappearing before her eyes, consumed by rage and pain. "I am the same person you fell in love with," she insisted, her voice breaking. "The money doesn't change who I am inside. Doesn't it? Because the woman I fell in love with was honest. She was real. She trusted me enough to be herself with me." Harry's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but his voice was hard as granite. "But you're a stranger wearing her face." "That's enough, darling," Susan said, standing and moving to her son's side like a protective mother hen. "You don't need to put yourself through this anymore." "No," Harry said, his gaze never leaving Barra's face. "I need to understand. I need to know why. Why did you lie to me? Why did you marry me under false pretenses? What was the point of any of it?" The questions came like bullets, each one designed to wound, to expose, to force her into confessions she couldn't make without destroying what little remained of their relationship. "Because I loved you," Barra said simply, the words torn from her heart. "Because for the first time in my life, someone saw me for who I really was, not what I was worth. But I never saw the real you, did I? Because the real you is Barra Blackwood, daughter of Alexander Blackwood, heir to a fortune most people can't even imagine. The real you has been lying to me every single day since we met. The money isn't who I am. The money is everything," Harry exploded, his carefully maintained control finally shattering completely. "Don't you understand? Everything we built together was based on a lie. Every struggle we shared, every dream we made, every moment of intimacy, it was all fake because I was falling in love with someone who didn't exist." "I exist," Barra said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm standing right here. I'm the same woman who married you, who loves you more than anything in the world." "No, you're not, because that woman was honest. That woman trusted me. That woman was afraid," Barra shouted, her composure finally cracking like ice under pressure. "Afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd see dollar signs instead of a person. Afraid that you'd love my bank account instead of my heart. Afraid of exactly this, of you looking at me like I'm a stranger because of something I never chose and never wanted." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of their harsh breathing and the distant noise of traffic outside their windows. Harry stared at her with eyes full of pain, and Barra realized she'd lost him. Not to Susan's manipulations, not to the lies she'd told, but to the truth itself. The truth that she was someone he'd never really known. "You should have trusted me," he said quietly, his voice hollow with defeat. "You're right, I should have. But I was scared, and young and stupid, and I thought—" "You thought you could play house with a normal guy until you got bored and went back to your real life," Susan interjected smoothly, her voice cutting through Barra's explanation like a surgeon's scalpel. "How long were you planning to keep this charade going, dear?" "Until you inherited Daddy's company. Until you found someone more suitable to your station? That's not, isn't it? Susan continued, moving closer like a predator sensing weakness. Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a rich girl's experiment in slumming it. See how the other half lives, have a little fun with a middle-class boy, then disappear back to your penthouse when reality gets inconvenient. Stop, Harry said, but his voice lacked conviction, and Bara could see the poison taking hold. Face the truth, darling. She's been playing you from the beginning. The mysterious inheritance, the tragic backstory, the convenient explanations. It was all designed to keep you from asking the right questions. Bara watched in horror as Susan's poison finally took full effect. She could see Harry turning Susan's words over in his mind, looking for patterns, reinterpreting every moment of their relationship through the lens of betrayal and deception. Is that what this was? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. An experiment, a way to see how normal people live. No, Bara said desperately, reaching toward him. It was never that. I love you, Harry. Everything I felt, everything we shared, it was real. Was it? Because I'm having trouble telling the difference between what was real and what was performance. The hurt in his voice was like a knife to Bara's heart. This was what she'd been afraid of from the beginning, not that Harry would want her money, but that he'd never be able to see past it to the woman underneath. All of it was real, she said, her voice breaking with desperation. Every moment, every feeling, every kiss, every night we spent planning our future. Stop lying, Harry shouted, his control finally snapping completely. Just stop. I can't stand to hear another lie come out of your mouth. His hand moved before Bara could process what was happening. The slap echoed through their apartment like a gunshot, sharp and final and devastating. The force of it snapped her head to the side, and she tasted blood where her teeth cut her lip. Bara's hand flew to her cheek, her eyes wide with shock. In 8 months of marriage, Harry had never raised a hand to her, had never even raised his voice until Susan arrived to poison everything they'd built together. "Oh my," Susan said softly, but there was satisfaction in her voice, the sound of a woman who'd finally achieved her ultimate goal. "Oh, Harry, darling." And that's when the front door opened. Alexander Blackwood stepped into the apartment flanked by 2 security guards, his presence instantly filling the small space with the kind of authority that came from controlling billion-dollar empires. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with steel-grey hair and eyes that could cut diamonds. His entrance transformed the tiny Queen's apartment into something far more significant, a courtroom where judgment was about to be passed. He took in the scene with a single glance. His daughter holding her cheek, her husband standing over her with his hand still raised, Susan Fraser smiling like a cat who'd cornered a canary. The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of quiet that comes before earthquakes and avalanches and other forces of nature that reshape entire landscapes. "Gentlemen," Alexander said quietly to his security team, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "please escort Mrs. Fraser from the building." "Now wait just a minute," Susan began, but her confident facade finally cracked as she realized who she was facing. "Now," Alexander's voice carried the kind of quiet menace that had made him one of the most feared men in corporate America. Susan looked to Harry for support, but Harry was staring at Alexander Blackwood with something approaching terror. This wasn't just any angry father. This was a man who could destroy lives with a phone call, who could make people disappear from their careers, their social circles, their entire existence. "Harry, darling, don't let them." But Harry said nothing as the security guards gently but firmly escorted Susan from the apartment. The door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. Alexander Blackwood turned his attention to the man who had just struck his daughter. "Mr. Fraser," he said, his voice deadly calm, "I believe you and I need to have a conversation." Chapter 9. The Father's Wrath. Alexander Blackwood stood in the wreckage of his daughter's marriage, like an avenging angel dressed in Armani, his presence transforming the tiny Queen's apartment into a courtroom where Harry Fraser was about to face judgment. "Papa," Barra whispered, her hand still pressed to her reddening cheek. Alexander's eyes never left Harry's face, but his voice gentled when he spoke to his daughter. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" "I'm fine." "No," Alexander said quietly. "You're not fine. You haven't been fine since you married this man. But you will be." Harry stood frozen in the middle of the living room, his face cycling through shock, recognition, and growing terror as he realized exactly who he was facing. This wasn't just any protective father. This was Alexander Blackwood, a man who owned senators and judges, who could end careers with a whisper and destroy lives with a signature. "Mr. Blackwood," Harry managed, "I can explain." "Can you?" Alexander moved deeper into the apartment, his trained eye cataloguing every detail. The second-hand furniture his daughter had insisted on buying, the cramped space she'd chosen over the penthouse that was her birthright, the modest life she'd built while pretending to be someone else. "Because from where I'm standing, it appears my daughter has been assaulted in her own home." "It wasn't like that, wasn't it?" Alexander's voice carried the kind of quiet menace that had made him legendary in boardrooms across the world. "Because I distinctly saw you strike my daughter. In my experience, there's only one word for a man who hits a woman: coward." Harry's face went white. "Sir, I would never normally. My mother said things and I was angry and—" "Ah, yes, your mother." Alexander's smile was razor-sharp. "Susan Fraser, the woman who's been systematically destroying my daughter's marriage through lies, manipulation, and fraud." "Fraud?" Alexander pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photograph. "The surveillance photo your mother used to convince you my daughter was meeting with me secretly. The woman in that image is actually a hired actress named Jennifer Walsh. Your mother paid her $5,000 to pose for that photograph." Harry stared at the phone screen, his face crumbling as he recognized the woman who'd helped destroy his marriage. But that's not Barra." "No, it isn't. Just as the private investigator your mother hired was actually a man named Dennis Chen, who specializes in creating false documentation to support predetermined narratives. Every piece of evidence your mother presented was carefully fabricated to paint my daughter as a liar and a fraud." Alexander moved to the coffee table where the contents of Susan's folder were still scattered. With clinical precision, he began picking up documents. Birth certificate, real, but obtained through illegal means. Mr. Chen has a contact in the records office who provided it for a fee. Trust fund statements, real, but acquired through corporate espionage that will land your mother in federal prison when I press charges. Property records, real, but accessing them required bribing a city clerk. Each revelation hit Harry like a physical blow. "She said she was protecting me." "She was protecting herself," Alexander said coldly. "Your mother owes significant gambling debts to some very dangerous people in Australia. She saw my daughter as her ticket to financial security, either through extortion or by convincing you to divorce Barra and pursue her fortune through legal means." Harry sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. None of it was real. The investigation, the evidence, The only thing that was real was my daughter's love for you, Alexander said. A love so deep she was willing to give up everything, her inheritance, her security, her family, to build a normal life with a man who saw her for who she was, rather than what she was worth. Barra had remained silent during this exchange, watching her father systematically dismantle the lies that had destroyed her marriage. But now she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It doesn't matter anymore, Papa. The trust is gone. Even without your mother's lies, Harry can never look at me the same way again." "Is that true, Mr. Fraser?" Alexander asked. Because I'm curious. What exactly do you think my daughter has done wrong? Loved you enough to risk everything? Chosen you over a life of luxury? Worked a minimum wage job to experience what it meant to be normal? Harry looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion and regret. She lied to me about who she was, about her family, about everything. She omitted details about her background to protect herself and, frankly, to protect you. Do you have any idea what it's like to be worth $12 billion, Mr. Fraser? The kidnapping attempts, the assassination plots, the constant threat from people who would kill you for a fraction of what my daughter is worth. Alexander moved to the window, looking out at the street where his security team was undoubtedly positioned. My daughter has survived 3 serious assassination attempts, Mr. Fraser. The first when she was 7, someone tried to poison her at a school function. The second at 14, a kidnapping attempt thwarted only because of extensive security measures. The third at 17, a car bomb that killed her bodyguard and nearly killed her. Harry's face went ashen. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Because my daughter chose to trust you with her heart while protecting you from the reality of what loving a Blackwood actually means. She chose to live in this apartment instead of the penthouse I built for her. She chose to work for $30,000 a year instead of taking her position as my heir. She chose you over everything. The weight of those words settled in the small apartment like a judgment. Harry stared at Bara as if seeing her for the first time, not as a liar or a fraud, but as a woman who'd sacrificed everything for love. Bara, he whispered. It's too late, she said. Even if you can forgive the lies, you'll never be able to forget who I really am. Every time you look at me, you'll see Bara Blackwood instead of the woman you fell in love with. That's not true, isn't it? You slapped me, Harry. You've never raised a hand to anyone in your life, but you hit me because your mother convinced you I was playing games with your heart. Harry's face crumpled. I'm sorry. God, Bara, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I was so angry, so hurt. I know. And that's exactly why this can never work. The doubt will always be there now. The question of whether I'm being honest, whether I'm hiding something else, whether our entire relationship is built on lies. Alexander watched this exchange with the expression of a man who'd seen too much heartbreak in his lifetime. Mr. Fraser, do you love my daughter? More than my own life. Then fight for her. Prove that you're worthy of the sacrifice she made. Show her that you can see past the money to the woman who chose you over everything. But Harry was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. How can I? How can I prove I love her for herself when I know what she's worth? How can I touch her without wondering if I'm touching a billionaire instead of my wife? It was the question that had haunted Bara from the beginning, the fear that had driven her to lie in the first place. Money changed everything, colored every interaction, made genuine love nearly impossible. Because love isn't about what someone is worth, Alexander said quietly. It's about what they're worth to you. And my daughter was worth everything to you before you knew about the money. Either that was real or it wasn't. The apartment fell silent except for the sound of Harry's quiet sobs and the distant noise of traffic outside. Bara watched her husband, was he still her husband, struggle with the weight of truth and regret and impossible choices. Finally, Alexander spoke again. Bara, pack your things. You're coming home. Papa, this marriage is over. Mr. Fraser has made his choice, and his choice is to let my daughter's love be destroyed by his mother's poison and his own inability to see past circumstances to character. I didn't say that, Harry protested. You didn't have to. The moment you struck my daughter, you said everything that needed to be said. Alexander moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Mr. Fraser, I understand your anger. Being lied to by someone you love is devastating. But my daughter didn't lie to hurt you. She lied to protect both of you from a world you were never equipped to handle." He looked around the small apartment one more time. "She chose this. She chose you. She chose a life of limitations and budget concerns and second-hand furniture because she thought you were worth more than all the money in the world." The door closed behind Alexander Blackwood with a soft click, leaving Harry and Barra alone with the wreckage of their marriage and the weight of choices that could never be undone. Chapter 10. The Greatest Revenge. 24 hours later, Harry Fraser stood outside Alexander Blackwood's Manhattan penthouse, his entire world reduced to the simple, devastating realization that he had thrown away paradise and called it justice. The security guard at the front desk looked at him with the kind of polite disdain reserved for people who clearly didn't belong. "Sir, do you have an appointment?" "I need to see Barra," Harry said. "My wife. I need to see my wife." "I'm sorry, sir, but Ms. Blackwood isn't taking visitors." Ms. Blackwood, not Mrs. Fraser. In one day, his wife had already begun disappearing back into the world he'd never been meant to enter. "Please," Harry said, his voice cracking. "Just tell her I'm here. Tell her I need to apologize." The guard's expression softened slightly. "Sir, I'll call upstairs, but—" "She won't see you." Harry turned to find Alexander Blackwood emerging from a private elevator, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Harry made in 6 months. But it wasn't the expensive clothes that made him intimidating. It was the look in his eyes, cold and final as a judge's gavel. "Mr. Blackwood, please, I need to talk to her." "No, you don't. What you need is to understand that some doors, once closed, can never be opened again." Alexander gestured toward a seating area in the lobby's marble expanse. "But since you're here, let's talk. Man to man." They sat across from each other in leather chairs that cost more than Harry's car, the weight of impossible wealth and power pressing down on Harry like gravity. "How is she?" Harry asked. "Destroyed," Alexander said simply. "My daughter hasn't eaten in 2 days. She hasn't slept. She sits in her room staring at that ridiculous coffee cup necklace you gave her, crying for a life she can never have back." Each word was a knife. "I can fix this. I can make it right." "Can you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, the damage is irreversible. You struck my daughter, Mr. Fraser. You raised your hand to a woman who loved you enough to give up everything. I know what I did was unforgivable. Do you? Because I don't think you understand the magnitude of what you've lost." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes like ice. "Let me explain something to you. My daughter is pregnant." The words hit Harry like a physical blow. The lobby spun around him, and he gripped the arms of his chair to keep from falling. "Pregnant? 8 weeks. She found out yesterday, after the doctor I called examined her following your outburst." Alexander's voice carried the weight of absolute judgment. "My daughter is carrying your children, twins, and yesterday was the first time in her life she questioned whether bringing them into the world was a blessing or a curse." Harry couldn't breathe. Twins, his children, growing inside the woman he'd destroyed with his doubt and his mother's poison, and his own inability to see past money to love. "She wanted to tell you herself," Alexander continued, "had planned to surprise you with the news. Instead, she's upstairs wondering how to raise your children while protecting them from a father who proved he could turn violent when pushed. I would never hurt her again, never hurt them. I was out of my mind." "Yes, you were, and that's exactly the problem. Men who lose their minds, who let anger override judgment, who listen to poison and call it wisdom. Those men don't get second chances with my daughter." Alexander stood, straightening his suit jacket with precise movements. "But here's what's going to happen, Mr. Fraser. You want to see your wife and children. You want a chance to earn back what you destroyed. You're going to have to prove you're worthy of them. How? You're going to rebuild your life from nothing, no help from your mother, no family connections, no safety net of any kind. You're going to cut all ties with Susan Fraser permanently. She's being deported back to Australia to face charges for fraud and corporate espionage. You're going to build a fortune from the ground up, entirely on your own, sufficient to protect and provide for a family that will be worth billions." Harry stared at him. "That's impossible." "Is it? Because if you truly love my daughter, if you truly want to be a father to your children, then nothing should be impossible." Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. "You have 1 year, Mr. Fraser. 1 year to prove you can be the man my daughter believed you were. 1 year to build something substantial enough to convince me you're not just another fortune hunter who got lucky. And if I can't, then you'll never see them again. My daughter will raise your children as Blackwoods with all the protection and privilege that name provides. They'll know their father chose his pride over their family." The cruelty of it took Harry's breath away. A year to build wealth that had taken Alexander Blackwood decades to accumulate. A year to prove his worth to a man who could buy and sell countries. "You're asking me to become someone I'm not. No, I'm asking you to become someone worthy of what you threw away." Alexander moved toward the elevator. "My daughter sacrificed everything to be with you, Mr. Fraser. The question is, what are you willing to sacrifice to be with her?" The elevator doors opened, and Alexander stepped inside. "1 year," he said, as the doors began to close. "Starting now." Harry sat alone in the marble lobby, surrounded by wealth beyond his comprehension, and understood that this was his penance, not just to rebuild his life, but to rebuild himself into someone worthy of the love he'd destroyed. Outside, New York City stretched before him. Millions of people, thousands of opportunities, infinite possibilities for someone desperate enough to seize them. He thought of Bara upstairs, carrying his children, crying over the marriage they'd built and lost. He thought of the coffee cup necklace, $10 from a street vendor, but worth more than all of Alexander Blackwood's billions, because it represented a love that had been pure and true and possible. Harry Fraser walked out of the Blackwood building with empty pockets and a broken heart, but also with something he'd lost weeks ago: purpose. He had 1 year to prove that love could overcome pride, that redemption was possible, that the man Bara had fallen in love with still existed somewhere beneath the doubt and anger and manipulation. 1 year to earn back paradise. The greatest revenge wasn't Alexander Blackwood's wealth or power. It was the knowledge that Harry would spend every day of that year remembering what he'd lost, fighting to become worthy of what he'd thrown away. And if he succeeded, if he somehow built a fortune and a life worthy of Bara Blackwood Fraser, he would face the ultimate test, whether the love they'd shared could survive the truth of who they both really were. The clock was ticking, paradise was waiting, and Harry Fraser had work to do.